Hello, I'm Keenan Fry, and my partner is Komp Craig, and we are going to present to you Project 3, the LMA for Henry Drake. I'm going to begin with our justification, and then I will discuss Forms 2, 9, and 11, and Komp will address Forms 1, 7, 8, and 10. And then we'll talk about our overall findings. For the justification, this is slide number 2. We referred to the Croning and Holbrook document. There's basically two key figures. There's one on page 23 and then a second one on page 24. So figure 1 is the components of a learning media assessment for students in conventional literacy. That's Form 1, page 23. And then figure 2 is on page 24. And this is the components of a learning media assessment for students in a functional being the key word, literacy program. So we went through all of the forms for Henry Drake. We actually went through all 11 of the forms multiple times. And we came to the conclusion after reviewing the data and we came to the conclusion that the functional literacy program was the most appropriate program for Henry Drake. Now, what that indicates is that you're going to basically use Form 2, 8, 9, 10, and 11. We threw in an additional evaluation for Form 7. Komp will talk about that. That has to do more with, which is the literacy tools inventory. For our review, as indicated on page 24 of the LMA handbook. There's a couple of quotes that I'll read to you. So, principle of best practices following the spirit of the law. This is from Croning and Holbrook. Basically considering is that the spirit of the law is grounded in best practices, which is the learning and media assessment is considered a continuous process, not a process that occurs upon initial evaluation and then every 3 years thereafter or at some arbitrarily established point in time. So essentially what the spirit of the law means is there's the letter of the law, which is what you literally have to do to be in compliance, and then the spirit of the law, which is what the law intends to exhibit, the intention of the law as it is supposed to be applied. If we are to practice best practices, which is the intention of all TVIs, then it's really important to respect the spirit of the law, which is effectively what they're discussing here. So effective teachers are continually engaged in diagnostic teaching as part of their daily practice. So that's another key one. Spirit of the law basically requires diagnostic teaching as part of your daily practice. And then diagnostic teaching assures that assessment findings are educationally valid since the strategies used during assessment will be continued into instruction. So what that's essentially saying is that they're essentially one sort of event. One hand washes the other. I apologize for using so many idiomatic phrases, but realistically, it's a process where as you are teaching, you are assessing. As you are assessing, you're not necessarily teaching because you don't want to be teaching during an assessment which may, alter your assessment findings. So there are times for just pure assessment, but the idea of diagnostic teaching is that as you are teaching, you are assessing the student's progress. So this kind of opens the door for our initial rationale for the IEP, which is that Henry needs a functional literacy program. That's where his needs are at. But there's potential room for him to actually gain academic literacy skills and to actually be at a higher sort of level in that regard. So we're talking about functional literacy at this point in time because he's so young and he's facing so many hurdles that he needs to overcome. But it appears there may be an opening for a conventional literacy program in the future. That would be Forms 3 through 6. That would require future evaluation, but as we've said, an LMA is a continuous process, so this isn't this isn't the final note in the story, so to speak. My partner Komp will now talk about Forms 1.
Hi there. Form 1 is just the general student information. Our student is Henry Drake. He was born 2007. He is 5 years old at the time of the assessment. Um, Looking at his assessment and his report, we had some questions about his near and distance acuity reported. Um, on the right side for both near and distant was 2200 with correction, but his left acuity was unreported. We're wondering what kind of correction was used for the acuity testing. And if it was with correction, why is he not prescribed glasses? So we just want more information on maybe what his left side acuity was. And I'm going to kick it back to Keenan to inform you about Form 2.
So for Form 2, we're talking about the use of sensory channels. We made some observations. Essentially, part of the procedures is to do at least 3 or more observations, 15 to 20 minutes, various times of day in structured, unstructured environments. So we noted on our slide the dates of the observations in 2012. They were September 24th and 25th and October 4th. You need to do at least 3 observations, but you know, part of the ongoing evaluation, continuous evaluation sort of process, as we've discussed in best practices, is to do as many observations as you can justify. We've observed him on the playground at 10 feet away. He responded to seeing a teacher at 10 feet away on the playground. He waved at the teacher from 8 feet away, saw and responded to the crook of a finger at 5 feet away, and made possibly brief eye contact at 5 feet away. So that's distance vision. We referred to the literacy program, the conventional literacy program on page 229 through 32, and we don't believe that that's appropriate at this point in time for Henry. But again, considering the ongoing evaluation process, it is possible in the future that the conventional literacy program, as described on pages 229 through 232, would eventually become appropriate. That is a possibility, but that's something to be discussed in the future. Okay, Komp will now talk to you about Form 7.
Form 7 is about the assistant technology and literacy tools. There wasn't any dates documented for the assessment itself for AT. My question and thoughts were, why does it state that assistive technology is not needed, especially if the student prefers to use his right eye? His preferred near visual working distance range is between 6 and 8 inches and has difficulty with cluttered materials. If acuity is 20 over 200 with corrections, why does he not have prescription for glasses? Since the day the evaluation was recorded, it may be reasonable to consider an AT reevaluation since we do not know the date of the last evaluation. I will be talking about Form 8 as well. Form 8 has to do with the functional learning media checklist. The part of the additional accommodation that were provided in the augmentative communication strategies, but it does not state what kind. So there is a citation to see page 66 of Cohen and Holbrook, the if and then a number 2. Why is the primary disability stated as ASD and language impairment and blind or low vision as a secondary?
Form 9 is just indicators of readiness for a functional literacy program. This is for students with additional disabilities. We're going to err on the side of caution and express a degree of skepticism towards the ASD diagnosis, the autism spectrum disorder diagnosis. We will err on the side of caution to not necessarily indicate a contrarian opinion, but rather to indicate a opinion of interest in how that diagnostic how what the diagnostic process was to arrive at that finding. But again, we're not challenging it. We're just interested in knowing more about it, because right now it's being labeled on his IEP that his primary learning disability is in fact autism, which is more of a social emotional disorder and has an entirely different criterion for treatment and support than a visual impairment. And so we're very interested in understanding as to why primacy was placed upon the ASD diagnosis instead of the clearly indicated visual impairment. That was Form 9. Komp is going to talk to you about Form 10.
Form 10 talks about the initial selection of the functional literacy medium through the finding of the IEP. My only question and thoughts for this form is if a student who has additional disability is able to use literacy skills for more than functional purpose, that conventional literacy will apply. However, when filling out Form 4, I did not think that the student was ready for a conventional literacy program. Student, the student was only a yes for 3 of the checklists out of 16. Maybe it might be due to his ASD or immaturity. This is just one example that forms the basis of our initial rationale. In slide 2, it is likely in the future Henry's skill may advance to an extent which would then justify his reevaluation using Form 4 instead of Form 10. This consideration indicates his potential approach towards conventional literacy in the future. And Keenan will close out and tell you about Form 11.
Okay, Form 11, there's a lot on here that is a repeat of Form 2. There's some ideas here on possible activities. There's a Rice Krispie treat activity that is included on here, a suggestion for a Rice Krispie treat activity that involves identifying the Rice Krispie treat blocks, knowing how to pour the correct amount of Rice Krispies into a measuring cup, which requires some hand-eye coordination to locate the box in a visually complex situation like a cupboard with other box items. That whole activity is delineated in the section on notes on visual function, and that's an interesting activity that's somewhat appropriate because it's based on independent living skills. This is based on him learning basic tasks such as feeding himself, preparing meals for himself. Obviously, you can't eat cereal for all 3 meals, but considering he's 5 years old, if he was able to pour himself a bowl of cereal and pour his own milk and go about the whole process of that, and maybe put his dish in the sink, that would be an impressive functional vision task. Yeah, I think there's more that we could discuss on that, but we'll leave that open to you for the slides. We believe that Forms 3 through 6 are inappropriate for Henry. We did an extra evaluation on Form 7 that Komp did. We believe that Forms 8 through 11 are most appropriate because they are concerned with functional literacy, which is most likely going to be the area of Henry's current development. However, we do believe in the ongoing evaluation process according to best practices, and we are looking forward to the opportunity to evaluate Henry, if appropriate, by the Forms 3 through 6 for a conventional literacy program. That may potentially emerge as Henry ages and his learning, the conditions of his learning, the conditions which define the highest function of his learning, is more understood. At this point, he's very young, and we'd like to develop a longer bibliography and recording of his learning methods, uh, via sensory channels, his most appropriate sensory channels, but also preferred activities, via secondary auditory, his secondary sensory channel, his auditory channel. We'd like to develop a more extensive bibliography, and we'd like to try additional evaluations with Henry in the future. We'd like to understand more about the ASD diagnosis and why there was a primacy placed on that, why he's not using a prescription pair of glasses, even though he's legally blind, and why he's not currently using certain forms of AT. It says he's been evaluated to use AT, but he's not currently using it. Um, so we're very interested in learning more about Henry, how he learns, and discovering what his potential is. Thank you for your time. I'm Keenan Fry, and my partner was Komp Craig.